Loving Father, we again come to your title, play, participate another life resilience conversation on Francis encyclical, the feeling, and how we can live the current challenges of this life, of community, society, country, and the world. Again, give us God the faith in this time of confusion and doubt as we continue to experience the threat of the COVID-19 pandemic in addition to our present problems that beset us already. We ask for the grace of God in this time of fear and uncertainty, and trust to hold on to your merciful love. We thank you, O God, for giving us another afternoon's conversation to be participated by our visitors from Rome, Father Amado Padal. All these things, O God, we ask and we pray, our Father who art in heaven, holy be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who sin against us. Do not bring us to the test, but deliver us from evil. Amen.
We also ask the intercession of Blessed Mother, like Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with you. Blessed are thou, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary,
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and the hour of our death. Amen.
glory be to the Father, to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now and ever shall be, forever. World without end. Amen.
Come, everybody, to the another afternoon of our conversation on the letter of Pope Francis, Fratelli. Good afternoon.
Marami pong salamat, Doc Benny. And for our opening message, we'd like to welcome Bishop Broderick Pavillo.
Magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat.
Magandang hapon po, Bishop.
Salamat po at nagkasatagpo-tagpo ulit tayo ngayong araw ng Sabado para po sa ating ongoing formation. At sa pangalawang pagkakataon, mayroon po tayong speaker na galing sa Roma mismo. At dyan po sa Roma ay marami po diyang mga ideas, maraming mga articles na lumalabas sa paglumalabas po ang isang bagong encyclical. Kaya I'm sure Father Pix will be able to share with us deeper insights about this encyclical. Pero sana, ang isi-share ni Father Pix ay magwet ng ating appetite, nagbigay ng lasa sa atin na we will come to read the encyclical itself. Yan po yung hamon sa atin kasi encyclical na ito ay in-address ng Santo Papa hindi lang po para sa mga obispo o sa mga pari, but to all people of goodwill. No, kaya kasama po tayo diyan, no? Kaya sana basahin po natin upang mas lalo nating ma-appreciate ang mensahe na ibinibigay po ng Santo Papa sa atin. Nagbigay na po ang Santo Papa sa atin ng encyclical about our commitment to evangelize the world. Kaya mayroon po tayong encyclical about evangelization. Mayroon din encyclical about our care for the earth, how we take care of the earth. Nagkaroon na rin tayo ng pag-uusap tungkol dyan. At ngayon naman is how we get united and how we work together with all people of goodwill. Hindi lang po ng mga Katoliko, ngunit para po sa iba pang mga tao. Kaya iyon yung fraternity, solidarity sa lahat pong mga tao. Kaya sana po ito'y makatulong sa atin, lalong-lalo na po sa ating pagsisikap na maisabuhay ang mga aral sa atin ng simbahan sa ating panahon ngayon. So, maraming salamat po. Welcome sa inyo. At sana po makatulong sa atin yung babahagi sa atin ni Father Pix.
Maraming salamat po, Bishop. And to welcome some guests, ito na ang panahon mo. Brother June Cruz, ang minamahal.
Magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. Bago po ako magsimula, hinihingi na po natin na sana i-mute po natin ang ating mga sarili sa ating pagsisimula ng sama-sama nating pakikinig. Kasi po naka-broadcast po tayo sa CBCP FB page live, Sangguniang Laiko at iba pa pang mga page. Pag po bigla kayong nagsalita, hindi kayo nakamute, lumalabas po kayo doon. Tapos nagtatanong, ako ba yan? Pero nakikita na ini-istorbo niya yung speaker. So pakiusap lang po, pakimute lang po muna habang tayo po ay makikinig sa ating presenter sa hapong ito. Nakakatuwa po na napakarami po talagang na nakakasama natin. Yung nakaraan po nating conversation, sa ngayon po ay 14,000 na po ang views doon. At yun po ay isang pari doon galing sa koledyo. Yung mga nakaraan po natin ay marami din, kaya patuloy po namin kayong hinihikayat at nagpapasalamat kami na patuloy din kayong sumasama. Hindi ko po mababasa ngayong lahat ng mga nandito ngayon kasi umabot na po tayo ng 32,000. Joke po yun. Pero marami po talagang nakakatuwang patuloy na nakakasama natin dito ang mga presidente ng iba't ibang mga diocesan councilors of the laity. At kamukha po ng Palo, kamukha po ng Cagayan de Oro, at iba't iba pong mga diocesan councils of the laity. Nandito rin po ang Diocesan Councility of Lipa, okay? At iba pong mga catechetical ministries. Gusto lang po nating batiin na nandito rin daw po ang mga Girl Scouts from Iloilo. Okay? At yung mga Somascan Missionary Sisters. At nakakatuwa po na marami tayong mga kasamahan ngayon sa iba't ibang mga dioceses, Tarlac, Tabuk, okay? At yung iba po ay nanggagaling pa sa mga malalayong lugar. Pasensya na po kayo, hindi ko po muna mababasang lahat dahil talagang gusto nating maituloy ang ating pakikinig ngayon sa isang napakahalagang encyclical. Bakit po mahalaga? Ang mismong Santo Papa po ang naglabas nito at gusto nating makapakinig naman ng paliwanag galing sa isa nating magaling na teacher. Magaling po siyang magturo. Kaya po itutuloy ko na po. Ang ating pong speaker ngayon ay nasa Roma. Ginising po ng medyo maaga para po makapag-share siya ngayon sa atin. Isa po siyang redemptorist na pare at ngayon po ay naninilbihan bilang co-secretary ng JPIC Roma. Isa po siya sa mga dicastery doon sa Roma. Pag po pinuntahan yung Facebook page na nakalagay doon, he is pro-life, peace, environment, and human rights advocate. So, bukod po nun, siya rin po ay isang artist, composer, poet, okay? But more than that, he is a patriot. Dati po siyang executive secretary ng CBCP Basic Ecclesial Community Desk na naging responsable sa promotion ng Year of the Parish sa Communion of Communities. Hindi ko po ini-exaggerate pero sa tapang po at pagmamahal sa Diyos nitong ating speaker, Father Pix, baka po meron na tayong susunod na martir para sa ating simbahan. Yung iba po hinihingi ang maging martir. Hindi ko po hinihingi para sa kanya. Ngunit alam ko pong matapang siya at mahal niya ang ating bayan, mahal niya ang ating simbahan. Kaya without further ado, would like to welcome Father Amado Picardal. Magandang umaga po, Father Pix.
Okay. Greetings from
You can share
Rome.
your screen.
Okay, I'll just go to my screen muna.
Yes po.
Okay. Oops. Teka. Teka muna, from the beginning. Okay, greetings from Rome. Magandang hapon po dyan. Dito, umaga pa. Actually, I arrived here in Rome last week of December, and I started with my work sa January. I'm the Executive Co-Secretary sa Justice and Peace and Integration Commission sa Union of Superior Generals, USG at UISG. Kaya hindi ito discuster just to correct that. It's a 3-year term and then subject to another renewal. Nagpapasalamat po ako sa inyo for having me and for giving me the opportunity to talk about Pope Francis' latest social encyclical, FrattelliTutti. Actually, it's a very long document, 43,000 words. And it's so rich and substantial that 50 minutes is not enough to adequately explain its content in depth. It needs to be read, studied more deeply, and above all, it needs to be lived and applied in various aspects of our life: social, economic, political, cultural. So what I have to offer is an overview and my commentary as a theologian. Ito pong aking presentation has 2 parts. First, there is the overview of the document, at saka highlighting significant text that is relevant, especially to our situation in the Philippines. At pangalawa, a brief commentary that focuses on a theological theme or framework that I believe is the key to understanding its continuity with Laudato Si. So, the overview. If we look at the table of contents, there is, of course, the introduction, and then there are 8 chapters. The Dark Clouds Over a Closed World, Chapter 1, and then Chapter 2, A Stranger on the Road. 3, Envisaging and Engendering an Open World. Heart Open to the Whole World, Chapter 4. Chapter 5, A Better Kind of Politics. 6, Dialogue and Friendship in Society. 7, Paths of Renewed Encounter. At saka yung the 8 is Religions at the Service of Fraternity in our world. But actually, we can divide it into 3 major sections. The first section is the global context and situation. That's chapter 1. And the second section is the Christian vision and message. And this is contained in chapter 2 and 3. And the third section is the concrete response or action, chapters 4 to 8. It actually follows the see, judge, act method. But before moving to the first section, let's talk about the introduction briefly. The introduction of the document clearly affirms the inspiration of Saint Francis in this encyclical. Of course, it begins with the first phrase, FrattelliTutti, brothers all. This actually is about the saints' counsels to his converts to live the gospel. Pope Francis focuses on one important counsel, a love that transcends the barriers of geography and distance. I'd like to highlight this one because this is actually a key to understanding the whole document, a love that transcends barriers of geography and distance. And this is the Pope, the saints recognized his closeness to the whole of creation, Saint Francis, and regarded all creatures as brothers and sisters. Kaya nga, brother sun, sister moon. And yet, he was even closer to his fellow human beings. Kaya nga, this awareness prompted Pope Francis to devote this encyclical to fraternity and social friendship. Pope Francis also mentions taking up some of the themes found in the document on fraternity, which is signed with the Grand Imam Ahmad Al-Tayyib in Abu Dhabi in 2019. Okay, so let's begin with the global context, the first section. You know, every encyclical usually begins with the human condition or experience which the church finds herself in as she proclaims the appropriate Christian message, the good news. So it begins usually with the situation. And this is the context from which the gospel text and message is proclaimed. And of course, this requires reading the signs of the times. And this is the starting point of the See, Judge, Act method. So the first chapter and the first section, the dark clouds over a closed world. This is a bleak view of what is happening all around us. Please take time to look at all these images because this captures what is happening at this time in our world. In this section, Pope Francis mentions several events that will describe what is happening. There is a fragmented, divided world despite previous efforts to integrate nations. Of course, there's the weakness of international and regional institutions. There's individualism and narrow nationalism. Each person for himself or herself, and each nation for itself. Populism, popular and national unity influenced by various ideologies, is creating new forms of selfishness and a loss of the social sense under the guise of defending national interest. And he also speaks about the globalization of indifference, a throwaway culture, abortion, euthanasia, neglect of the elderly, discrimination against women, modern-day slavery, the human trafficking, racism. There's also the lack of respect for human dignity and human rights. And the continuing violent conflict and wars. Closed borders to migrants fleeing poverty, wars, climate change, etc. The hyper-connected digital communication that promotes hatred, division, violence, addiction, and that fails to promote genuine friendship and community. The lack of global approach or plan to address the global crisis or problems, such as the pandemic, the economic, ecological, operated by politics without vision and motivated by narrow self-interest. The extremism and polarization as political tools that promote perpetual confrontation. and the global neoliberal economic system and culture that perpetuates inequality and poverty. According to Pope Francis, in reference to this global economic system, opening up the world is an expression that has been co-opted by economic and financial sector and is now used exclusively of openness to foreign interests or to the freedom of economic powers to invest without obstacles or complications in all countries. Local conflicts and disregard for the common good are exploited by the global economy in order to impose a single cultural model. This culture unifies the world, but divides persons and nations. For as society becomes ever more globalized, it makes us neighbors, but does not make us brothers. We are more alone than ever in an increasingly massified world that promotes individual interests and weakens the communitarian dimension of life. In this way, political life becomes increasingly fragile in the face of transnational economic powers that operate with the principle of divide and conquer. According to Pope Francis, the marketplace by itself cannot resolve every problem, however much we are asked to believe this dogma of neoliberal faith. Whatever the challenge, this impoverished and repetitive school of thought always offers the same recipes. Neoliberalism simply reproduces itself by resorting to the magic theories of spillover or trickle without using the name as the only solution to the societal problems. There's little appreciation of the facts that the alleged spillover does not resolve the inequality that gives rise to new forms of violence threatening the fabric of society. The story did not end the way it was meant to, and the dogmatic formulae of prevailing economic theory proved not to be infallible. The fragility of world systems in the face of the pandemic has demonstrated that not everything can be resolved by market in freedom, unquote. So as we can see, at the root of all the division, inequality, violence, and other related problems is not just selfishness, greed, and individualism, but the neoliberal economic system based on this and that perpetuates this. And this is indeed a prophetic critique of this system and culture, which is incapable of solving the problems and crises that it has spawned. Yet, amidst this bleak landscape, Pope Francis ends this chapter by pointing to the sign of hope in the time of the pandemic. An awareness by ordinary people who are the forefront of responding to the crisis that our lives are interwoven and no one is saved alone. So according to Pope Francis, the recent pandemic enabled us to recognize and appreciate once more all those around us who, in the midst of fear, responded by putting their lives on the line. We began to realize that our lives are interwoven with and sustained by ordinary people, brilliantly shaping the decisive events of our shared history. Doctors, nurses, pharmacists, storekeepers, and supermarket workers, cleaning personnel, caretakers, transport workers, men and women working to provide essential services and public safety, volunteers, priests, and religious. They understood that no one is saved alone. Look at these pictures, the frontliners, those who are responding to the crisis that we are in today. And let us thank them. Okay, so the first section describes the context of a world that is fragmented and divided, unable to address the global crisis and problems that we all face due to individualism and indifference promoted by a neoliberal economic system and culture. The second section that follows offers an alternative vision that is needed based on the Christian message of the primacy of love that impels us to universal communion, expressed in fraternity and social friendship. And this is the content of chapter 2 and 3. The Christian vision, the love that impels us to universal communion. Chapter 2 is entitled The Stranger on the Road. And of course, we all know it's about the Good Samaritan. You know, in reading this text, we are asked, each of the characters am I? The one who responded to the victim on the road, or the one who ignored and continued his way? So we are challenged to examine our own response to the plight of others that we encounter, especially those who are in need. The question is, are we preoccupied with our own concerns and obligations, including our religious duties, that we fail to respond to their needs? Like the Good Samaritan, we cannot be blind and indifferent to the suffering of others. We are called to care for each one, to become neighbors to one another, moved by love that is universal, that overcomes prejudices, personal interests, and cultural barriers. And this is a call to action following the example of the Good Samaritan, heeding the command of Jesus at the end of the parable. Go and do likewise. Quoting Pope Francis, he says, let us take an active part in renewing and supporting our troubled societies. Today, we have a great opportunity to express our innate sense of fraternity, to be good Samaritans who bear the pain of other people's troubles rather than fomenting greater hatred and resentment. Like the chance traveler in the parable, we need only have a pure and simple desire to be a people, a community, constant and tireless in the effort to include, integrate, and lift up the fallen. We can start from below and case by case act at the most concrete and local levels, and then expand to the farthest reaches of our countries and our world with the same care and concern that the Samaritans showed for each of the wounded man's injuries. Unquote. So, as a continuation of section 2, chapter 3, which is entitled Envisaging and Engendering an Open World. And this is all about going outside of ourselves and being open to others in love that impels us to universal communion. According to Pope Francis, in the depths of every heart, love creates bonds and expands existence, for it draws people out of themselves and towards others. Love then is more than just a series of benevolent actions. Those actions have their sources in a union increasingly directed towards others, considering them of value, worthy, pleasing, and beautiful apart from their physical or moral appearances. Our love for others, for who they are, moves us to seek the best for their lives. Only by cultivating this way of relating to one another will we make possible a social friendship that excludes no one and a fraternity that is open to all. He continues, and this I believe is one of the most significant texts. Love also impels us towards universal communion. No one can mature or find fulfillment by withdrawing from others. By its very nature, love calls for growth in openness and the ability to accept others as part of a continuing adventure that makes every periphery converge in a greater sense of mutual belonging. This need to transcend our own limitations also applies to different regions and countries. Indeed, the ever-increasing number of interconnections and communications in society, in today's world, makes us powerfully aware of the unity and common destiny of the nations. In the dynamics of history and in the diversity of ethnic groups, societies, and cultures, we see the seeds of a vocation to form a community composed of brothers and sisters who accept and care for one another. A love capable of transcending borders is the basis of what in every city and country can be called social friendship. Genuine social friendship within society makes true universal openness possible. This love is associated with solidarity, which begins in the family. So according to Pope Francis, I would like especially to mention solidarity, which as a moral virtue and social attitude can be born of personal conversion, calls for commitment on the part of those responsible for education and formation. I think first of families called to a primary and vital mission of education. Families are the first place where the values of love and fraternity, togetherness and sharing, concern and care for others are lived out and handed on. As we all know, charity begins at home, but it goes beyond. That's why the solidarity among the poor and acting as a community is part of this. According to Pope Francis, the needy generally practice the special solidarity that exists among those who are poor and suffering, and which our civilization seems to have forgotten, or would prefer in fact to forget. Solidarity means much more than engaging in sporadic acts of generosity. It means thinking and acting in terms of community. So again, there's the emphasis here of solidarity in community. So, love, according to Pope Francis, impels us to universal communion. This is the key message of this section. It's the universal communion that enables us to become aware that we are brothers and sisters, belonging to a universal family called to promote fraternity and social friendship. And this is the vision that is needed in the midst of a divided and fragmented world in order to address the common problems and crises that we face. The primacy of love that impels all to universal commune is the framework for dialogue and in developing a world that is open and interconnected. And this is the antidote, the alternative to a neoliberal ideology that is based on selfishness, individualism, separateness, inequality, exploitation of the weak by the strong, and which abets violence. So this closes the third section of the document, the call to action. This vision of love and universal communion that is at the heart of fraternity and social friendship is the framework for addressing the problems and concerns related to migration, politics, the financial and economic system, in promoting peace, and the role of religions. So chapters 4 to 8 contain the concrete application of this vision to these concerns. Chapter 4 is entitled A Heart Open to the World. This addresses the problem of migration and the closing of borders to migrants, fleeing persecution, poverty, armed conflict, climate change, etc. And it also addresses the relation between the local and the global. Regarding migration, this is what Pope Francis has to say. Our response to the arrival of migrating persons can be summarized by 4 words: welcome, protect, promote, and integrate. For it is not a case of implementing welfare programs from the top down, but rather of undertaking a journey together through these 4 actions in order to build cities and countries that, while preserving the respective cultural and religious identity, are open to differences and know how to promote them in the spirit of human fraternity. Regarding the question between the local and the global, Pope Francis speaks about the local and the global communion. And this is what he has to say. For a healthy relationship between love of one's native land and a sound sense of belonging to a larger human family, it is helpful to keep in mind that global society is not the sum total of different countries, but rather the communion that exists among them. The mutual sense of belonging is prior to the emergence of individual groups. Each particular group becomes part of the fabric of universal communion and there discovers its own beauty. All individuals, whatever their origin, know that they are part of the greater human family, without which they will not be able to understand themselves fully. In chapter 5, Pope Francis advocates a better kind of politics that is based on love, fraternity, and social friendship in the service of the common good. We know what type of politics we have at present. The politics of self-interest, the populism, the individualism. According to Pope Francis, the development of a global community of fraternity based on the practice of social friendship on the part of peoples and nations calls for a better kind of politics, one truly at the service of the common good. This kind of politics can overcome the reform and oversee the reform and renewal of the economic system. Remember that Pope Francis indicts, he criticizes the neoliberal system and populism. And he says only a better kind of politics can oversee the reform and the renewal, especially of the economic system. According to Pope Francis, global society is suffering from grave structural deficiencies that cannot be resolved by piecemeal solutions or quick fixes. Must needs to change through fundamental reform and major renewal. Only a healthy politics involving the most diverse sectors and skills is capable of overseeing this process. An economy that is an integral part of a political, social, cultural, and popular program directed to the common good could pave the way for different possibilities which do not involve stifling human creativity and its ideals of progress, but rather directing that energy along new channels. Pope Francis speaks about political love and charity, and this is something that is new and unique. And how do you apply love, fraternity, and friendship in politics? For we as individuals can help others in need when they join together in initiating social processes of fraternity and justice for all, they enter the field of charity at its most vast, namely political charity. This entails working for a social and political order whose soul is social charity. Charity finds expression not only in close and intimate relationships, but also in macro relationships, social, economic, and political. This political charity is born of a social awareness that transcends every individualistic mindset. Social charity makes us love the common good. It makes us effectively seek the good of all people, considered not only as individuals or private persons, but also in the social dimension that unites them. Good politics will seek ways of building communities that at every level of social life in order to recalibrate and reorient globalization and thus avoid its disruptive effects. Political love is all about creating just regulations, structures, and institutions. According to Pope Francis, there is a kind of love that is elicited. It acts, proceeds directly from the virtue of charity and are directed to individuals and peoples. There is also a commanded love expressed in those acts of charity that spur people to create more sound institutions, more just regulations, more supportive structures. It follows that it is an equally indispensable act of love to strive to organize and structure society so that one's neighbor will not find himself in poverty. It is an act of charity to assist someone suffering, but it is also an act of charity, even if we do not know that person, to work to change the social conditions that cause his or her suffering. Pope Francis continues, politics too must make room for a tender love of others. Amid the daily concerns of political life, the smallest, the weakest, the poorest should touch our hearts. Indeed, they have a right to appeal to our heart and soul. They are our brothers and sisters, and as such, we must love and care for them. If beyond this, those who love and who no longer view politics merely as a quest for power may be sure that none of our acts of love will be lost, nor any of our acts of sincere concern for others. No single act of love for God will be lost. No generous effort is meaningless. No faithful endurance is wasted. All this encircle our world like a vital force. Chapter 6 speaks about dialogue and friendship in society. And in this chapter, Pope Francis highlights the importance of dialogue in society, which should be carried out in the spirit of fraternity and friendship. Dialogue requires encounter with others, respecting each other's point of view and legitimate interests, human dignity, and accompanied by kindness. According to Pope Francis, authentic social dialogue involves the ability to respect the other's point of view and to admit that it may include legitimate convictions and concerns. Based on their identity and experience, others have a contribution to make, and it is desirable that they should articulate their positions for the sake of a more fruitful public debate. When individuals or groups are consistent in their thinking, defend their values and convictions, and only occur to the extent that there is genuine dialogue and openness to others. Chapter 7 is entitled Paths to Encounter. And this chapter focuses on the promotion of peace, which is connected to justice, mercy, and forgiveness. And this is also the basis for saying no to war and its justification, and also in the rejection of capital punishment. And here are some notable quotes. According to Pope Francis, in many parts of the world, there is a need for paths of peace to heal open wounds. There's also a need for peacemakers, men and women prepared to work boldly and creatively to initiate processes of healing and renewed encounter. Regarding forgiveness and reconciliation, Pope Francis says, forgiveness and reconciliation are central themes in Christianity and in various ways in other religions. Yet there is a risk that an inadequate understanding and presentation of these profound convictions can lead to fatalism, apathy, and injustice, or even intolerance and violence. Jesus never promoted violence or intolerance. He openly condemned the use of force to gain power over others. Instead, the gospel tells us to forgive 70 times 7 and offers the example of the unmerciful servant who was himself forgiven, yet unable to forgive others in turn. Nor does this mean calling for forgiveness when it involves renouncing our own rights, confronting corrupt officials, criminals, or those who debase our dignity. We are called to love everyone without exception. At the same time, loving an oppressor does not mean allowing him to keep oppressing us or letting him think that what he does is acceptable. On the contrary, true love for an oppressor means seeking ways to make him cease his oppression. It means stripping him of a power that he does not know how to use and that diminishes his own humanity and that of others. Forgiveness does not entail allowing oppressors to keep trampling on their own dignity and that of others, or letting criminals continue their wrongdoing. Those who suffer injustice have to defend strenuously their own rights and those of their family, precisely because they must preserve the dignity they have received as a loving gift from God. If a criminal has harmed me or a loved one, no one can forbid me from demanding justice and ensuring that this person or anyone else will not harm me or others again. This is entirely just. Forgiveness does not forbid it, but actually demands it. Forgive, but not forgive. A very important reminder. According to Pope Francis, those who truly forgive do not forget. Instead, they choose not to yield to the same destructive force that caused them so much suffering. They break the vicious circle. They halt the advance of the force of destruction. They choose not to spread in society the spirit of revenge that will sooner or later return to take its toll. This does not mean impunity. Justice is properly sought solely out of love of justice itself, out of respect for the victims as a means of preventing new crimes and protecting the common good, not as an alleged outlet for personal anger. Forgiveness is precisely what enables us to pursue justice without falling into a spiral of revenge or the injustice of forgetting. Pope Francis says, we can no longer think of war as a solution because its risk will probably always be greater than the supposed benefits. In view of this, it is very difficult nowadays to invoke the rational criteria elaborated in earlier centuries to speak of the possibility of a just war. Never again. And of course, Pope Francis also affirms the need to speak for life and say no to death penalty. He says, the arguments against the death penalty are numerous and well known. The Church has rightly called attention to several of these, such as the possibility of judicial error and the use made of such punishment by totalitarian and dictatorial regimes as a means of suppressing political dissidents or persecuting religious and cultural minorities, all victims whom the legislation of these regimes consider delinquents. All Christians and people of goodwill are today called to work not only for the abolition of the death penalty, legal or illegal in all its forms, but also to work for the improvement of prison conditions out of respect for the human dignity of persons deprived of their freedom. So we move to the last chapter, religions at the service of fraternity. This chapter focuses on religions at the service of fraternity in the world and their role in promoting peace. Pope Francis asserts that violence and terrorism are due to misinterpretations of religious texts and spawned by policies that lead to injustice and oppression. The role and mission of the Church in the public sphere is asserted, and religious leaders have an important role in building peace. Now, regarding the role of the Church in the public sphere and in politics, this is what Pope Francis has to say. The Church, while respecting the autonomy of political life, does not restrict her mission to the private sphere. On the contrary, she cannot and must not remain on the sidelines in the building of a better world or fail to reawaken the spiritual energy that contribute to the betterment of society. It is true that the religious ministers must not engage in party politics that are the proper domain of the laity, but neither can they renounce the political dimension of life itself, which involves a constant attention to the common good and a concern for integral human development. The church has a public role over and above her charitable educational activities. She works for the advancement of humanity and of universal fraternity. The church's action is geared towards a primacy of universal communion with the human family. And this is what Pope Francis says. For us, the wellspring of human dignity and fraternity is in the gospel of Jesus Christ. From it, there arises for Christian thought and for the action of the church the primacy given to relationship, to the encounter with the sacred mystery of the other, to universal communion with the entire human family as a vocation of all. We cannot forget Christ's desire that they may all be one. Hearing this call, we recognize with sorrow that the process of globalization still lacks the prophetic and spiritual contribution of unity among Christians. Notwithstanding, even as we make this journey towards full communion, we already have the duty to offer common witness to the love of God and for all people by working together in the service of humanity. Pope Francis, echoing that document on human fraternity that is signed with the Imam in Abu Dhabi, emphasizes the role of religious leaders as people of dialogue, building peace. Echoing that document, it says, at times, fundamentalist violence is unleashed in some groups of whatever religion by the rations of their leaders. Yet the commandment of peace is inscribed in the depths of the religious traditions that we represent. As religious leaders, we are called to be true people of dialogue, to cooperate in building peace, not as intermediaries, but as authentic mediators. Each one of us is called to be an artisan of peace by uniting and not dividing, by extinguishing hatred and not holding on to it, by opening paths of dialogue and not by constructing new walls. So, near the end of this document, Pope Francis points to those who are models of universal fraternity. Saint Francis of Assisi, Charles de Foucault, Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And he ends with a prayer that you can see in that document. Okay, we move to the last, the second part is the brief one. A commentary on this document on FrattelliTutti from a theological point of view. FrattelliTutti can be seen as a sequel of Laudato Si. And there is a common theological framework that links them. And the link is the vision of universal communion. We are all interconnected. We are all brothers and sisters to each other and to the rest of creation. And this is the vision of Saint Francis that Pope Francis shares. Laudato Si affirms that we were created to be in loving communion with God, with one another, and with creation or nature. We all belong to the universal family created by God, whom we call Father, and we are all brothers and sisters to one another, and also even to the rest of creation. And FrattelliTutti focuses on communion with one another as brothers, sisters, and friends. And is grounded on love that impels us to universal communion. Thus, universal communion is a key theological theme for understanding Laudato Si and FrattelliTutti. What does communion mean and imply? And how did Saint Francis and Pope Francis expand its reach? Communion is actually, it comes from the Greek word koinonia, translated as communio in Latin, in Italian it's rendered as unione fraterna, communion in English, and sometimes also translated as fellowship. And it connotes having something in common and associated with fellowship, kinship, friendship, unity, solidarity, partnership, participation, and sharing. There is a popular Greek adage which is quoted by Aristotle in the Nicomachean Ethics. It states, "Friends are one heart and mind, and they share everything in common." And this is the ideal of friendship in the Greek culture, to be one heart and mind and to share everything in common. And this is what communion is all about. And we find this echoed in the Acts of the Apostles, especially 4:30-35. The community of believers were of one heart and mind, and they share everything in common. Luke, the author, is asserting that the Greek ideal of friendship finds its realization in community, especially in the Christian community. Thus, the church is called to be a community of disciples and friends whose members live in communion, bound by a common faith, celebrated in table fellowship, and expressed in the sharing of goods where no one is in need, the communion of goods. That's why this is what the Eucharist is all about, a celebration of our communion, our friendship, our unity with the triune God and with one another. The ecclesiology of communion was the earliest model of the church, but was eclipsed by the institutional model in later centuries. And this was retrieved in the Second Vatican Council and became dominant ever since, the church as communion. Communion is realized at the levels of the universal church, the local church, the parish, and later the parish came to be seen even as a communion of communities or basic ecclesial communities. Ecclesial communion reflects Trinitarian communion. That's why Vatican II affirms the church is a people made one by the unity of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Communion also became the goal of ecumenical dialogue that leads to full communion. Saint John Paul II in Familiaris Consortio asserted that communion is to be experienced in the family, domestic church, in the relationship between husband and wife, who bow to each other to be one heart and one soul till death do them part, and also between parents and children. In Vita Consecrata, St. John Paul affirms that communion is at the heart of religious life. Thus, the theology of communion was seen within the confines of the church ad intra and extended in ecumenism, but was not applied to interreligious dialogue or to our relationship with nature. It was not really that universal. Saint Francis' vision of communion is universal rather than ecclesiocentric. This applies to his relationship with those belonging to other religions and also with nature and all other creatures. And this is the vision that inspires Pope Francis in Laudato Si and in Fratelli Tutti. In fact, it is in Laudato Si that the concept of universal communion has come into the magisterium of the Church, and this again reaffirmed in Fratelli Tutti. Universal communion in Laudato Si is the basis for integral ecology and the assertion that we are all interconnected. Ang lahat ng bagay ay nagkakaugnay. Tayong lahat ay nagkakaugnay. Human beings are made in the image and likeness of the triune God. God is a perfect communion of the three divine persons, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And from this flows our human dignity and our social nature. No one exists in isolation. Everything that God made is interconnected, that reflects the nature of God as communion. And since God is communion, we human beings are created to be in communion with God, with one another, and with creation. And this is part of our nature, which has been marred by human sinfulness, by selfishness and greed, which results in division, violence, inequality, injustice, and destruction of the environment. Pope Francis in Laudato says that the rupture of communion is associated with sin, with our sinfulness, with greed, and this has caused our alienation from God and also from one another, and this has resulted in violence, division, inequality, injustice, and the destruction of the environment. As Pope Francis writes in Laudato Si, human life is grounded in three fundamental and closely intertwined relationships: with God, with our neighbor, and with the earth itself. And Pope Francis affirms St. Francis' vision when he declares, as part of the universe called into being by one Father, all of us are linked by unseen bonds and together form a kind of universal family, a sublime commune which fills us with a sacred, affectionate, and humble respect. Fraternity and friendship among all God's creatures flow from universal communion. We are all interconnected. We should treat one another as brothers and sisters and as friends, belonging to a single family and community. In Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis focuses attention on horizontal communion, on how human beings are to relate to one another as brothers and sisters and as friends. Human fraternity and social friendship are based on love that impels all to universal communion. Thus, this encyclical makes us more aware that we are brothers and sisters belonging to one universal family called to communion with one another. A global fraternity motivated by love and kindness, constantly nurturing our social friendship that transcends borders, gender, race, religious affiliation, classes. Communion spurs us to partnership, sharing, solidarity, collaboration, participation, and ongoing dialogue. This communitarian vision is the alternative to the neoliberal ideology that is based on individualistic view of the human person, motivated by selfishness and greed, and is indifferent to the cry of the poor and the cry of the earth. Motivated by love that impels all to universal communion, we are all called to work together as one family and community to address the crises and problems that we face: the pandemic, poverty, war, migration, trafficking, various forms of inequality with the racial, gender, and economic. And this is the basis for our work for integral development, justice, peace, and the degree of creation. Love impels us to universal communion, the universal family, community of brothers sisters, and friends. So this ends my talk, and we now move to the open forum or the conversation.
Thank you very much, Father Pix, as we all fondly call him. Our floor is now open at ready. Mukhang ganadong-ganado si Father Pix sa ating time of Q&A. So kung meron, pwede ninyong isulat sa chat or even just a comment, or you may raise your hand and hopefully we can see you and call you.
Brother Mars, habang naghihintay tayo sa mga comments nila, gusto ko lang sabihin na unang-una maraming salamat, Father Pix. Marami na pong nakikinig ngayon doon sa Facebook page ng CBCP. Meron pa nanggaling ng Zambia na nakikinig sa atin ngayon. At of course sa Pilipinas, Solana, Tuguegarao, Lapu-Lapu City. At marami po sa kanila nagsasabing very enlightening. Thank you. Sabi ni Teresita Amasol. Okay? At talaga pong bawat slide po ay talagang napakarami nating dapat maintindihan at matutunan. So kung may mga katanungan po kayo, paki-chat po kay Brother Mars para mapadaloy po natin mabuti.
Is Gerard here? I think he has a question.
Yes, Father. Can I ask if there's...
Naka-on ba yung video mo? Please switch on your video para nakikita ko. Gerard, go ahead. There. I saw you now.
Father, good afternoon. Thank you very much for the short presentation. Actually, with all like what you said, 80,000 plus words ba yun, Father?
43,000 words.
Sorry, times 2 yung sinabi ko, no? And then, but then, it was, I know, Father, that even 2 hours, 3 hours is not enough, di ba? No, but this is a concern that I have, and then I know everyone loves the church, loves the Lord, di ba? Loves everything, but this is my this is my concern. And because nangyayari kasi, I know that the Abu Dhabi document on human fraternity was explicitly mentioned by Pope Francis. Tama po ba, Father? Yeah, and then one first thing is, kasi dun, nabasa ko din yung Abu Dhabi document, no?
Mm-hmm.
And I know the Pope being a Jesuit, ako din, hindi ako priest, but then I was formed as a Jesuit. Mm-hmm. Jesuits are, yung charism ng Jesuits, it's really to reach out to other people. Di ba? They're educators, no? I mean, the Jesuits as a whole have gifts, no? But when you look at the Abu Dhabi document kasi, then there was an issue there. I mean, I'm sorry, but is it okay to discuss now among the laiko, Father? Okay lang ba?
What the issue?
Yeah. It is about that was a document signed with the Imam, Imam Talayeb. That in fact it was really to bring this actually what's this? FrattelliTutti is an encyclical. It's really to bring that document into the sacramental life of the church. So ito lang yung question ko, Father, because it was said there in the Abu Dhabi document that the diversity of religions, creed, sex, color, no, was willed by God in His intimate wisdom. So one thing that brought out then the question that was asked to me by friends, by Catholics is, pag ganun, are all religions willed by God? So meaning not only Christian religion, but also Islam and the other religions, other faiths. Was it willed by God? So at first, sinabi ko, God is tatay natin lahat, di ba? Si God the Father. We're all His children. We're all His children, no? So, but then that statement kasi, Father, it created more questions with regard to the Christian faith. Then I also did some...
Let's focus, Gerard, on a few questions, one or two questions.
Yes. Number one...
Manito klase eh.
Sorry. But I was trying to explain, Brad Mars, yeah. One question is, should there be more clarity in that statement? Kasi ito lang, Brad Mars, no, I also did, because of that document, if you know lang, doon sa ibang lugar in European countries, because that is their thinking na, now there are our Muslim imams going into the holy sacrifice of the Mass. During church, during the Mass, nagpe-pray din doon. And then one thing is, when that I saw that video shared to me in Ireland, the imam was praying during Mass, and then yung sinasabi niya, we believe in this, we believe in Jesus. Parang yung pagka-pray niya, Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior, was placed one rung below Muhammad. So, and then the priest there, I think there was a comment there, the priest was using the Abu Dhabi document to be more welcoming. Now, this is my concern lang. Would it also happen here in the Philippines where the sacramental life of the church will be touched in its essence? Like, yung sa Holy Mass natin, sana hindi din mangyari dito, but someone shared din to me, I don't know, Brad Mars, Father Amado, and I know Bishop Pabilo is here, that there was also a similar case that happened, and it was on GMA, dun sa minor basilica in Quiapo, I think early this year. And there was also an imam that prayed during Holy Mass. So sa akin lang naman, Father, ito lang yung questions ko because
Gerard, I think maliwanag naman yung question, and I think it is appropriate for this year dahil ngayon interreligious dialogue, di ba? And so it's good that these questions are brought forth to light. Although dito wala naman tayong 3 oras katulad sa klase. So maybe in a general sense pwedeng masagot yan ni Father Pix. Go ahead po, Father Pix.
Okay, I think what is important here is that this document affirms the concept of universal communion. All of us were created by God to be in communion with Him, with one another, and with the rest of creation. And communion is not only within the church. Universal communion, I mean, it is extended to our separated brothers and sisters, the Christian churches, and even in our relationship with other religions.
Yeah.
And this is very important to recognize that. In interreligious dialogue, it's important that we hold on to our firm convictions. We do not give up any of our teachings.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Father, for
we do not give up anything. At the same time, we respect them for their own beliefs. Of course, the fact is that there are so many religions now. Of course, even before us, you have Judaism, and what is important is that all of these are attempts of human beings to be in communion with God.
Yeah.
We are not advocating for one universal religion. There's no such thing. At the same time that we affirm the diversity. Yet at the same time, within this diversity, we also affirm our unity. At the same time, we did not give up our own convictions about our religion. And that is all I think we have to. There are times that we go, there are other religions who come to our church. We welcome them, but we do not give them communion.
Yeah. Yes, Father. Thank you very much.
So I think it's important to affirm that we do not give up any of our conviction in our faith. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Father. And if I may add, konti lang, Brad Mars, thank you very much, Father, for affirming that. Kasi it's happening in other countries.
Okay, sure.
Diba, you know that, Father, they give one communion to Buddhists. And then, so it's thank you very much for, giving us that clarity. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
We always know that there is a theological discussion, and then pagdating sa practical application, syempre meron ding say ang mga diocese niyan. Number one talaga ang mga bishop ng bawat diocese. But wala namang binabago na anything sacramental si Pope Francis dito sa ating encyclical na FrattelliTutti. Are there any other questions here? From me po, Father Pix, I was inspired in the sense that you showed na ginamit ni Pope Francis, si Saint Francis, in both documents, Laudato Si and itong FrattelliTutti, for communion with nature, kalikasan, and communion with other human beings, no, itong ating ad extra. At the same time, parang merong apprehension dahil maliwanag. I think it was very clear in your presentation about structural social injustice that is present many parts of the world. Kasama na tayo dito sa Pilipinas. But for this systemic structural injustice, which calls for change, no? It calls for systemic change. Ibig sabihin, masakit din ito kasi any systemic change will directly or indirectly cause also pain and suffering. So that's just what's on my mind, that our objective is to try to eliminate or reduce this systemic structural injustice. But I think the process will also be a painful one.
Okay, first of all, masakit na talaga, no? And what is happening in our society is actually creating more and more victims, especially the poor. And it's only the few percent, the rich that are actually being benefited by this. And if you say masakit, masakit na. And any change has to be gradual and to be peaceful. We are not, Pope Francis is not advocating for a violent revolution. He doesn't advocate that. That's why that many people are saying, is he a communist? No, he's not even advocating communism. What is, of course, he already points, all he does is to criticize the failings of the prevailing neoliberal ideology. Even now, that's why that we're not capable of addressing the problems in our society and even the whole world, because it is beholden to this system. It does not benefit everybody. And this way that even now there are only changes that are happening. For example, Pope Francis does not actually advocate a specific political economic system, but there are what he calls what should be behind these systems. Speaks about communion, speaks about sharing, participation, the common good. Already, even during this time of the pandemic, there are changes that are happening. Before it was saying, capitalists would say, government, do not be, hands off. Now the governments are the ones that are actually, especially in the area of stimulus package, and all of those things. Of course, one of the specific models that in Europe now is the social democratic model. It's a mixed economy, capitalism and some form of socialism. But it's not the socialism of Soviet Union or of even of China. There's more involvement. Of course, even the folklore movement has been explained on what's called the economy of communion. There was an ongoing discussion about the economy of Francisco, of course, based on the principle of Saint Francis, that our economy should benefit everyone. There has to be communion, there has to be sharing, participation. So Pope Francis does not actually advocate a specific kind of structure. It's for economists, it's for government leaders, and it's also for the grassroots, to see what kind of social economic system that needs to grow, especially at this time, that will benefit everyone. That is why that he advocates that government leaders should make sure that there is a process that takes place.
Thank you very much po. And thank you also to Brother Vic Lahos, who just posted the link to the document. Siyempre, iba na pag binasa natin yung buong document. So I hope many here will really take time to read the document. We have time for one or two more questions. Yes, Doc Benny C. from Cagayan de Oro.
So, good afternoon, Father. Good afternoon, Father.
Good afternoon.
So, really a very comprehensive presentation. But, well, it's good really to read, no? Because of the documents that it has so many things that is to be taken up. So, as I listen to your talk, it talks about the global pandemic and the economic crisis, political polarization, and social isolation and exclusivity that is really prevalent at this time. And as I also listen, and the concern of the Pope, correct me if I'm wrong, Father, is that he insists that the vulnerable here is the poor people. The victim is the poor people, especially those that are also suffering from disabilities and discrimination, including the migrants and the refugees. No, they are the ones who are suffering from the systemic, the systems that we have now. No, I don't know or if how far the systems now is going, because it becomes very, very complicated in the guise of helping those underprivileged or the poor people, but it doesn't change anything. So, Father, can you enlighten us if at the end, is this also the issue of conversion among us? Because those people really in the government, those people in the institution are Catholics, are baptized Catholics. Is the issue about conversion, Father?
Yes,
let us be enlightened by this.
Yeah, because what is important here is any structural change has to be accompanied by personal conversion, social transformation, and personal conversion. Because no matter what type of systems that we have, if at the heart of each person is still that individualism, that selfishness and greed, that breeds corruption. Any type of system is going to fail. What a system can do is just to check that greed and corruption, to make sure that it does not happen, and to make sure that those in government positions will not use their position to enrich themselves. And this is very, very important. Because there are a lot of even now, a lot of billions are being wasted. You know, supposed to be for the poor. Okay, you give it to either a government official, he packets most of this and gives a few only to the poor. A lot of government agencies are also doing that, you know, wasting a lot of money for useless projects and not responding to the needs of the poor, you know. So both has to come together. You know. We need structural change, you know. Structures in the economy and in politics that works for the common good, you know, that is not exploited. Where there is, you have to erase corruption, respect for human dignity and for human rights. And these are the things that we ensure. At the same time, we have to constantly preach, you have to constantly promote personal conversion. And I believe that this is what I speak about. Most of people who are engaged in corruption and in abuses are also Catholics, but they're Catholics in name only. You know? What is missing is that love that is in their hearts. That's why that Pope Francis always emphasizes that love that is within each one of us, you know, that cares for the other, not just for the self. You know. Because without that, you know, that's why we speak about political love. You know, that our government leaders and officials must have that love for others, not for their own self or for their own family, because that's what most are doing, you know, how to enrich themselves, how to build up their fortune. That's why there is a lot of corruption that is taking place, you know. That what is hard is that love, you know, that to treat others as brothers and sisters, as friends, you know. So this is very important. But the problem with a lot of our systems is that it's so individualistic. There are systems like the neoliberal system that speaks about the invisible hand theory. You know, we pursue our self-interest, and as we become richer, that will trickle down to the poor. You know, but it never happens. You know.
It's good to be really in depth about this. We have two questions here. One from Dr. Mariano and followed by Anthony.
Maraming salamat po. Father, actually, yung tanong ko nasagot nyo na in part. Kasi nga, our Laudato Si, napakagandang sekwela po nito, na segue ng Laudato Si itong FrattelliTutti. Kasi nga po, sinabi sa Laudato Si that we're part of creation. Actually, we are the most important part of creation. Kaya nga, nandun yung ating kabihasnan para sa atin. And it's true yung sabi ni Brother Vic, na our brothers, the poorest of our poor, sila yung victim gaya ng ating mundo at sa katong mahihirap, sila ang ating mga naging victim. Ngayon ang sabi nga, lalo na dito sa Pilipinas, majority sa atin ay Katoliko. Ngunit mukhang yung tinatawag na silent majority. Kasi gaya sa ating politiko, maraming Katoliko doon. Pero mukhang hindi na susunod yung mandate ng ating church, yung tinuturo sa atin na tama. Mukhang naiiba kasi nga ngayon lang medyo dumarating na naman itong death penalty. So ang tanong ko po, tama po yung sinabi nyo na personal conversion is the key to for all these changes. Pero paano po natin maiibigay itong changes na ito kung mukhang mas marami ang umiba ng pananaw, mukhang mas marami ang naging selfish, mas marami ang naging individualistic. Mukhang iba ang pagtingin ngayon sa mundo, mukhang masyadong materialism tayo. Kung minsan nga itong pandemic na to sabi na nating napakalungkot, ngunit sa isang parte mukhang ito ang gumigising sa atin na tayo talaga ay wala kung wala ang ating poong may kapal. So anyway, ang tanong ko po, Father, how can we, the silent majority, how can we help? What can we do to change the minds of our leaders, to change the minds of our na mukhang umiiba na nga. At palagay ko yan din ang rason kung bakit dumadami din ang mga sekto ng relihiyon dito sa Pilipinas. So, yun po, Father.
You know, the question of how is what all of us, needs to answer, because it's something that is concrete. Remember that speak about the church, it's not only about the priests, the bishops, or the religious, about lay people. And that's why that we are all involved first in the area of evangelization. And evangelization is about not just about the dogmatic teachings of the church. It's about the moral teachings. Any evangelization has to be done by words and by deeds, how we live our life. That's why that it begins in the family, in the community, in our diocese. That's why that we're all involved. We're into this. When we speak about mission, it's our mission as not just priests and but as lay people. How can we bring light in the midst of the world? And that besides our personal individual acts of charity, what kind of communitarian efforts that we bring about? In helping the poor, for example, of course you can feed them. We continue doing that now, but what are systems and procedures that we can do that will enable us to be more generous to one another? At the same time, what are the systems and structures of the economy that we can develop that will benefit not just a few, but everyone? So it is actually a continuing task for us, because we know that how many are really practicing, that are really living the gospel. It's still a minority. You can be 84% Catholics, but it's just a minority. Pope Benedict speaks about the creative minority that needs to continue that mission, so that there will be personal conversion at the same time that there will be transformation in society.
Thank you po, Father. Anthony, you still have a question?
Good afternoon po, Father.
Followed by Bishop Pabilio.
Okay. We all know po na yung si Pope Francis, everything he said is a voice from God. Tama po ba? So in your, while I was listening in your report po, I want to relate during this time of pandemic, while everyone is seeking for everything to go back to normal. You said in your slides that yung Pope Francis said about a sign of hope. So can you please give us a more specific, what kind of sign of hope is that? Kasi for us po, ordinary people, we are seeking for some good news. Kasi po, if Pope Francis said that it's a sign of hope, it must be coming from God. Tama po ba?
Speak about signs of hope. How are we responding to this pandemic? In spite of, mismanagement and ineptitude on the part of our politicians, those of us from below are actually working together.
Amen.
And that we are showing kindness and tenderness to one another. You see a lot of people who are hanging in the streets, but there are people who are having day-to-day feeding these people. A lot of volunteers. That in itself already, there are a lot of companies and corporations who are showing this to their employees. There's corporate social responsibility. So these are happening from below. And we should not forget it.
Amen. Thank you.
That there is a pandemic of kindness that is happening now. And you have to let it grow.
So it's the love that's in person.
Bishop Pabilio, mataas po kayo.
Ako may dalawang May dalawang comments lang ako. Hindi naman tanong, kundi comments lang. Ang isang comment, yung mga documents po na galing sa Roma, lalong-lalo mga encyclical galing sa Santo Papa, naturally po, ang kanyang mga contents ay general. They give principles. Kasi para sa buong mundo yan eh. At iba't iba ang situation ng iba't ibang bahagi ng mundo. Kaya kung babasahin po natin, general principles. Pero kailangan natin ibaba sa ating sitwasyon. Kaya kailangan natin pagnilayan. And that can only be done if we go through the document and meditate over them one by one, paragraph by paragraph. Paano ko maisabuhay ito? Ano bang ibig sabihin nito dito sa Pilipinas, dito sa Maynila, o dito sa Cebu, o dito sa Dagupan? No? Kaya yan yung task natin. Binigyan tayo ng giya, ng gabay, ngunit general yan kasi that's for international consumption, for global consumption. Pero we have to localize that in our situation. That's why the document will not have any effect unless tayo mismo ay talagang pagnilayan natin at tingnan natin paano maisasabuhay sa ating sitwasyon. Pangalawang comment po, ito pong dokumentong ito, parang sinasabi ng Santo Papa, let us look beyond after this pandemic. Anong klaseng mundo ang gusto natin after this pandemic? No, marami sa atin po'y gusto lang bumalik sa dati. Pero yung dati po nating tinanggilan, inalisan noong 2019, this is precisely the neo-liberal system. Iyan yung economy that kills. Gusto natin ba bumalik sa ganyang ekonomiya? Na ilan lang ang yumayaman, marami naghihirap. Gusto ba natin bumalik sa ganyang sitwasyon na punong-puno na naman ng traffic? Na hindi tayo makakilos na nasa traffic? Gusto ba natin bumalik sa ganyang sitwasyon na ang politika natin ay populist? Kung sino lang yung makakakiliti sa atin, saka natin bubutuhin? Okay, sinasabi ng Santo Papa, pagkatapos itong pandemic, sana inaasahan natin ay mas magandang mundo. No? Parang itong pandemic ay isang pagkamulat sa ating mata. But let us not dream of going back to what we have left behind. No? Kaya ito yung dream na ibinibigay sa atin ng Santo Papa. Na binibigyan tayo ng guidance. Ito sana yung bagong mundo na gusto nating madatnan natin pagkatapos itong pandemic. Kung hindi, nasayang lang yung pandemic. No, at alam natin po siguro ginagamit din ng Diyos ng pandemic para matauhan tayo at mag-create ng bagong mundo. Yan lang po.
Amen.
Ay nako, Bishop, parang nabasa ninyo yung mga private messages dito sa akin bilang host. Actually, I have received several here. Hindi nila nilagay sa chat na to everyone private to me na anong kinalaman nito sa simbahan ng Pilipinas? Anong kinalaman nito sa... Tapos tama-tama po nagsalita kayo. So it was a prophetic word, I guess, ano? And although there are still two who want to speak, my apologies dahil ang bilis ng panahon talaga pagka ito pinag-uusapan, lalo na encyclical. Magdadalawang oras na po tayo for your information. May request, Father Pix, probably to say some final words, considering these thoughts from shared to us by Bishop Pabilio and some of the questions raised. And also merong isang humabol din na question, ayaw ko kung masasama nyo sa closing remarks ninyo. Meron na po ba daw na ibang church leaders in the world or world leaders na officially nag-comment o nag-respond o nag-react dito sa FrattelliTutti? Has there been any official response or talagang bagong-bago pa lang, tayo pa lang ang nag-uusap nito?
Okay. Of course, the Imam Ahmad actually made a positive response, to this already. I don't know about the other response because this is still a new one, but I presume that this is a welcome document by all. Okay, as I've said earlier on, this is a 43,000 document that needs to be read, to be meditated on, and especially to be lived. How they can be applied in our own context. And why I would present this as an overview, to guide us through this document, because at least the structure. Okay, this there are three sections. The situation and the teacher's teaching, the values, the message, the basic principles, and then the action part. But I think we have to read this it's a very beautiful document. Every every paragraph is that needs to be unpacked. That is important though is how can we live it? How can we apply it in our own circumstances? And so I hope that that we have to go back. Have to read and reread this document and apply it in our own lives.
Amen. Maraming salamat po. We will also hear some final words from Bishop Pabilio para po sa inyong mga nagre-request ng mga copy ng slides, ganyan. This was recorded and actually it's being shared right now live sa Facebook, sa CBCP, and a few other pages. Of course, yung Sangguniang Laiko ng Pilipinas. So nandiyan po yung buong presentation ni Father Pix na around probably 50 minutes. So go ahead, you can feel free to use it.
I can also send my PowerPoint file to you so that if anybody wants to go through that PowerPoint, they can do so. I'll send it to you.
Thank you very much. Yes, there have been a number of requests. So kay Joseph sa Laiko, Joseph, ikaw na ang mag-coordinate sa mga nagre-request.
Yes, po. We will email.
Yes, thank you.
Father.
Some final words from Bishop Broderick Pabilio.
So ang final words ko lang po ay pasasalamat, no? Pasalamat kay Father Pix for sharing with us, giving us a good overview and some commentaries on the document. At pasalamat din po sa inyong lahat na dumalo dito. It shows your interest, no? Together po with your questions. And as Brother June shared with us, last conversation natin, nakaabot tayo ng 14,000. So ngayon po, kasama dito natin siguro mga 70 lang. Yung nasa Zoom natin. Pero marami din po dyan ay nasa Facebook. At ibalita nyo rin po sa iba. No? Sa inyong mga kasamahan, sa inyong mga grupo, nandito yung mga diocesan councils of the laity na mga leaders, ibahagi niyo po sa iba para mas marami rin pong makinabang sa ganitong mga gawain. Ito po yung maganda sa online that we are not limited only to the time that we have. But this continues to stay. Nandiyan yan. So pwede nyo ma-access. Kaya patuloy nyo pong ipaabot sa iba para yung mga tao din magkaroon ng idea tungkol sa document na ito and hopefully mahikayat sila na mas mapag-aralan, pagnilayan, at maisabuhay. So maraming salamat po sa inyo and continue to follow us in our almost weekly conversations.
Maraming salamat po, Father Pix, Bishop Pabilio. At ngayon sa ating napaka-espesyal na announcements, closing prayer at pagtatapos from Brother June Cruz.
Maraming salamat, Brother Mars. Maraming salamat, Father Pix and Bishop. Nung nakaraan po nating conversation, nagbigay din ng message si Bishop Val tungkol sa indigenous people. At sabi niya, sana hindi naman tayo puro statement lang. Sana naman gumalaw tayo. Next week po, ang ating bisita naman ay magsasalita tungkol sa Kaliwa Dam upang matutunan nating maigi kung ano pang maaari natin maitulong kila Father Pete at sa kila Brother Conrad. At sa susunod na Sabado naman po, ang magiging speaker natin ay si Justice Carpio para naman po pag-usapan natin ang West Philippine Sea. So yan po ang mga susunod natin. Ganon din po, huwag sana natin kalimutan yung first things first. isang napakagandang pagninilay ng mga first reading na binibigay sa atin ni Bishop Pabilio sa YouTube. Hinihingi po namin na pakinggan nyo yan, gawin yung parte ng inyong mga panalangin. At pagkatapos po ay mag-like din kayo, mag-share, mag-subscribe sapagkat malaking tulong po yan sa pagpapahayag ng ating magandang balita. Patapos na po tayo ngayon at ako po ay nagpapasalamat sa inyong lahat, ngunit salamat din sa Panginoon sapagkat alam kong may tinuturo ang Panginoon sa atin dito. And sa maiksing panalangin, pagtapos po niyan ay magkakaroon po tayo ng maiksing closing song. Titingnan ko kung maipe-play natin yung ating final song. Ngunit samahan niyo po ko sa ating pangwakas na panalangin. Panginoon, ikaw po nagsasabi sa amin ngayon na ang aming mundo ay nasa kadiliman. Ngunit mayroon pong pag-asa. At inaasahan namin na sa pamamagitan ng pag-inami sa bawat isa bilang mga kapatid, and in this universal communion, we might find, O Lord, the hope really to welcome, to protect, promote, integrate everyone, especially those in need. Lahat po kami ay magkasama-sama kung makita namin na talagang we are all connected. We are all brothers and sisters. May our own lives return to you. May we find ourselves, our heart turn to you. May we know more of you, and that we may be able to do what is right where we are, in the context we find ourselves in, and truly find ourselves one with nature, one with the church, one with the world, one with you, all brothers, FrattelliTutti. Thank you, dear Lord. Maraming salamat po. Hinahanap ko po yung music, pero kung wala man ay maaari na po kayong mag-log out. Pag nahanap ko, ipi-play ko po. Pero maraming salamat po.
God is telling all of us right now, whoever you are, wherever you are, be still and know that I am God.
So how will you recognize a true Christian? The true Christian is always grateful. The favorite word of the true Christian is thank you. Because for the true Christian, everything is a gift.
When you die to yourself, forget yourself, and give yourself as a gift to another person, that, my friend, is when you taste authentic, permanent joy.
This is Faith Watch TV, today's leading Catholic online TV. We at Faith Watch create all original content ranging from reflections from the Church's bishops and priests, lessons and catechesis, testimonies of your favorite inspirational speakers, talk shows, and news programs. Powered by Areopagus Communications, Faith Watch TV aims to deliver to you the best and the latest inside and around the Catholic Church, neatly packaged for the Filipino Catholic. Faith Watch TV, today's leading online TV, your Catholic channel.